We all know that fashion is cyclical. What was in style is no longer in style, but will become in style again. It's always some derivative of the original thing. So the same thing is with the modern interpretation of the pixie cut. The pixie cut has a pretty long history. When we think of a pixie, we think of basically two general things that make it a pixie: hair off of the neck and out of the eyes. With the popularity of the Bixie cut, we see some elements of a classic pixie cut, specifically hair off of the neck, in with a bob, which tends to be longer than a pixie in front and may or may not include some bangs, but not short cropped classic pixie bangs. Now, when we think about the history of the bob, immediately we think about the 1920s and 1930s. But believe it or not, the modern ancestor to the pixie cut also came from the 1920s. That's the Eton crop. The Eton crop came into fashion in the 1920s in England and was named after the Eton schools who wore their hair in a close cropped and tightly styled fashion. Like many school uniforms of the time, I'm sure that a hat was required by the Eton school. And the Eton crop allowed the fashionable ladies of London to wear their cloche hats and pull them on and off without messing up their hair. So what are the characteristics of an Eton crop? This one is interesting because it really does mean shortly cropped hair, but not what we think of as a modern pixie. One of the most notable people to wear an Eton crop was Josephine Baker. You often see her with spit curls styled around her face, maybe one on the forehead, and it does require longer hair in order to style it that way. Now, hair cutting in the 1920s wasn't as refined as it is today, but the signature characteristic of the Eton crop was that it was worn tight to the head to allow for hats to come on and off. So it was really more about how that closely cropped hair was styled more than how it was cut. You can turn almost any haircut that's short off of the neck into an Eton crop. So that's what I'm going to do today with this version of a Bixie cut, is we're going to style it into an Eton style. Also, a lot of modern styling products were not around. You didn't have hairsprays, hair gel wasn't invented until the 1950s, but you did have pomades, or pomades if you're fancy. So we're going to start by getting the hair a little bit damp to allow it to absorb the product. It's okay, you don't have to cry. It's going to look better soon. And we're going to use a generous amount of pomade, starting at the back and applying it in layers. Most pomades should be clear, and they have a very shiny finish with a surprising amount of hold for how wet they leave you looking. Almost any vintage style from like 1900 through the 60s is going to have pomade in it. It was a go-to styling product for years, and it's still really terrific and underutilized. If you're trying to do a true Eton crop, avoid the temptation to make finger waves. Like I said, use a generous amount of pomade. We may not be doing pin curls, but a little spit curl might not be out of the question. Gotta slay those 1920s edges. More pomade. How much pomade you use is really going to depend on the pomade, but it's always going to be more than you think. Now, before we address the top, let's talk about those sides. In order to give it that close cropped look, but also be maintainable as a hat goes on and off, not only do you need to use a generous amount of product, have I said that yet? But you're going to sweep back and slightly down so that when you put on your cloche hat, it stays smooth. If you want to do a spit curl on the side, a good indicator would be the hair that has to be tucked around the ear. We can leave that out. Now I like to take the back of the comb and flatten it, and then come back over the surface for those comb marks. But don't dig all the way down to the scalp. You're just realigning that surface hair after you've squashed it down. So I like to comb the back side of the section to make sure that underneath is nice and smooth. And then comb the front side. Combing the back side makes it smooth. Combing the front side makes it neat. Now when we get to the front, we have some choices to make, but a particularly Eton way of styling it is with a very deep side part. So I want to make sure that we get a nice deep side part. Now don't forget, this is 1920s. This is before the blow dryer was invented. Every set was a wet set. You were going to set your hair in rollers. You were going to do something to it to try to make that wash last as long as possible. You had to let your style dry into your hair. Now for a classic Eton crop, we still want to keep the hair out of the face, maybe even off the forehead, but a little bit of a shape doesn't hurt. Hair always going down and then back. Now she's ready for her cloche hat. Once this pomade dries, this is going to last for, 6 or 7 weeks. Just kidding. If you want to give her the spit curl for a little more style, take what would normally be the bang section. And what I like to do in that case is take this whole front section and comb it forward and back over the parting line. That way we can avoid seeing like a large gap at the scalp right where it's parted. And for a nice spit curl, pay attention to your base. Don't worry about this stuff yet. Spit curls are the close ancestors or friends to finger waves, and you build them the same way. You worry about your base first, lock it down with your finger, and then you can come back and be pretty forceful with shaping the rest without worrying too bad about messing up what you've already placed. The darker your hair is colored, the more the ends will just blend right in. And if you have, let's say I've got some straggly hairs, follow them around, lay it down by chasing one finger after the other. Now she's ready to go party, 1920s style.